Thank you so much for joining us today. Mr. Rajan, Mr. Pitroda, thank you so much for taking the time out to be with us here this evening. This is the annual India Town Hall of the National Indian Students and Alumni Union UK. For those of you who don't know about us, we are the pan-national body set up in 2012, which looks after students and alumni of Indian origin in the UK and young professionals. Amongst the very many things we do to help support our students here, we also fought a very long and hard battle for the post-study work visa, which of course has returned since our campaigning alongside a number of other individuals, including Lord Villamoria, who has joined us here. Thank you so much for joining us. We launched the annual India Town Hall called Perspective last year. We called it Perspective for a very simple reason, which is that in today's times with technology in particular, it seems to have become very difficult to have a conversation without getting labeled a bhakt, or without getting labeled an aptad or a liptad or a pseudo-secular or various maligning terms. We live in the world's oldest democracy, right? And we are talking about the world's largest democracy. So we felt the least we can do as responsible citizens is to help facilitate a conversation that can touch upon difficult topics, a conversation that can touch upon topics that you might not necessarily feel very comfortable with, but a conversation that allows us as responsible citizens who have a duty to hold our elected officials to account to be well informed. I can make up my own mind, you can make up your own mind, but you need to be informed the right way. The problem is that the information we get these days isn't necessarily correct, always. The problem is that there are various tools on Facebook, on Twitter, where, for instance, you can really target messages, to certain people along in line of what they believe, to help them in their little echo chamber. Okay? So deepfakes, anyone heard of deepfakes here? Yeah, deepfakes are videos where we can now use technology to make anyone say whatever you want to say. You might not have said it, but that video will go viral. That's the sort of challenge we are faced with in today's times, where artificial intelligence, machine learning, and technology and a lot of innovation is being used for good, but equally, there is a lot of propaganda. There is a lot of false information deliberately being spread, often subconsciously, not deliberately as well, because you don't know any better. So we thought, why not start a focused conversation which takes place every year, where we bring eminent intellectuals such as Dr. Rajan, and can I have a round of applause, please, to welcome him? And Mr. Pitroda, who is one of the most eminent intellectuals in our time. And this year, as you're aware, we're celebrating 150 years of Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi was the greatest patriot, as we all know, but he was also the greatest dissenter. And dissent is the bedrock of democracy. You cannot have a democracy without an impartial media. You cannot have a democracy without people holding our elected officials to account. Because I don't know about you, but I don't think governments are kings. Governments are elected officials, they're service providers, and that is how they should be treated, and that is how they should treat us. Therefore, as responsible citizens, it is our duty to have a balanced conversation. So paying tribute to Mahatma Gandhi, we're going to explore something new today. We're going to explore the challenges and the relevance of Mahatma Gandhi's teachings in today's times, particularly in the context of business and economic challenges. And we're very grateful to King's Business School for hosting our annual India Town Hall here today. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Kamini Gupta, who's an associate professor here at King's Business School, to set the scene, make the introductions, and let us get all started. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sanam, for the introduction and for facilitating today's event. I'm very grateful, and so is King's College London and King's Business School. On behalf of King's Business School and King's College London, it is my honor and privilege to be the host for today's event and to invite you all, to welcome you all to our talk, Gandhi at 150. We ignore Gandhi at our own peril, Martin Luther King Jr. said. And indeed, Gandhi has inspired, through his principles of nonviolence, many, many people around the world. But one of the qualities of Gandhi that I find most inspiring was his approach to criticism and openness to learning, both virtues that a university like King's hopes to embody and instill in its students. Globally, in today's political era, we see a disdain for criticism, where the very act of criticizing is labeled as either morally wrong or intellectually dishonest. This is a far cry from Gandhi, who often engaged in a public contemplation of his philosophy's criticisms and was amenable to changing his mind when new information was presented to him. He always maintained that it was not consistency of opinion, but rather a constant search for truth that was important. In one telling example, Gandhi received a lot of criticism for his support to the head of a municipality corporation who ordered the killing of 60 stray and rabid dogs. In response to this, Gandhi penned a series of articles reflecting on these criticisms, thinking about them, thinking about his own approach and thoughts on that. And he publicly redefined his position at the end of it. Such open engagement to criticism is as relevant now as it was when Gandhi was fighting colonial opposition, when the stakes to being wrong were perhaps even higher. Thus, let us all remember that no one, not even Gandhi, is beyond reproach or criticism. Which brings me to my second point. Some of Gandhi's philosophies, especially those related to economic self-sufficiency at a village level, are criticized and are certainly debatable, and we should not shy away from that. But Gandhi did not promote rejection of modernity for the sake of it. Instead, what he really aimed for was inclusive growth, and to ensure that the hundreds of thousands of villages of India were not bypassed by economic prosperity in other areas. And that again holds important lessons for us today, at a time when we see countries and communities within countries increasingly polarized by lopsided growth and economic models that benefit a few at the expense of others. We see that global wealth inequality has risen. In 2009, 380 people had as much wealth as the bottom 50%. By 2017, only 42 billionaires hold as much as the bottom 50% in the world. In the UK, we've observed this firsthand through the Brexit referendum, where we see the deep resentment that unequal growth and opportunities have brought, and the economic and social implications of that for everyone. So even as we promote, even as we encourage globalization and free trade, let us remember and balance that with local development and inclusive growth. I find resonance of some of these ideas with the talks and writings of our speakers today. They need no introduction, I'm not going to provide one. But in Dr. Rajan's book, The Third Pillar, he emphasizes the role of communities, and he touches upon this tension between globalization and local development, which I spoke of earlier. Mr. Pitroda has often emphasized the importance of integrating the Gandhian approach to service in both political ideology and conduct. And they together bring a wealth of experience and knowledge on a wide variety of issues, ranging from economic development to entrepreneurship, social prosperity to inclusive growth. And we're looking forward to hearing them reflect not only on Gandhi's legacy, but the kind of challenges that we confront in the future. So without further ado, Mr. Pitroda, could I please ask you to start us off by providing your opening reflections?
Thank you. Thank you. Can this come down? Well, I don't see my friends. That's okay. That's good. Thank you. Friends, good afternoon. It is indeed a special privilege and honor for me to be here at King's College, especially with Raghu and others. I want to thank organizers for the opportunity. And I want to talk about relevance of Gandhi in terms of what's been happening in the world and especially in India today. I believe Gandhi is more relevant today than ever before in the history. Gandhi is more relevant today because the world is essentially at crossroads. We are at crossroads because of connectivity. I have spent now about 54 years working on telecom and connectivity. And the connectivity in terms of content, context, is really changing everything around us. I don't think we really understand the power of connectivity. We still use connectivity to do the same things we have been doing in the past, as opposed to trying to do things we have never done before. Because of this change, we are at crossroads. Look at what is happening in US, in UK, Brexit, in India, where BJP stock is going up, but economy is going down. Climate change, Turkey, Hong Kong. Everywhere you look around, you see a lot of stress in the system. I believe this stress has a lot to do with the power of connectivity and the changes that we are being faced. Technology has become a big force. Unfortunately, best brains in the world are busy solving problems of the rich, who really don't have problems to solve. And as a result, problems of the poor don't get the kind of attention we deserve. So you have this disconnect between the real needs and wants. So we keep producing things for the people who can buy and not give people enough power to buy. I was born in 1942 when Gandhiji was still alive. I remember the day when Gandhiji died. We all had to take a bath in our family because my parents came from Gujarat to Orissa, and the only connection they had with Gujarat in those days was Gandhiji and Sardar Patel. In this poor family, my father was 4th grade educated. The main focus was really Gandhian way of living, rooted in so many simple values that Gandhi promoted then. When India became independent, my parents could feel that they were empowered by Gandhi, and they could send their children now to college. We are no longer a colony. So I went to school in Gujarat, studied Gandhian values. One fine day, read in the newspaper that President Kennedy has decided to send man onto the moon. I was young, energetic, and took a boat from India to Karachi, to Aden, to Egypt, to Italy, took a train to London, took a plane to New York, and took a bus to Chicago. And learned a great deal, and I have seen the differences in both sides of the ocean. Indian democracy, US productivity, efficiency. And I feel that there are lessons to learn from both sides. I worry about India today because my thinking based on Gandhian values tell me that ultimately Gandhi means to me specific issues in 3 areas. One, people, truth, trust, love, simplicity, and courage. 2, planet, environment, basic needs, sacrifice, sort of concern for service, and bottom-up development. Today I see everywhere top-down development. Decentralization is the key going forward. In telecom, I've learned a lesson from cell towers that if you decentralize, it becomes affordable, scalable, sustainable. It took us 115 years to get to 1 billion phones. Then it took us 15 years to add another 8 billion phones because of a different architecture based on decentralization. Gandhi also talked about platforms: democracy, freedom, inclusion, diversity, non-violence. These are the ideas that are so very critical, and I believe these ideas are being challenged in India today. Democracy has been hijacked, fear has been created, so I see exact opposite to what I believe in. When I talk about Gandhian idea of truth, lies are being propagated through social media, trolls, attacks. When I talk about trust, there is mistrust. When I talk about love, there is hate being propagated. When I talk about inclusion, they want to promote exclusion. Diversity, uniformity. And the list goes on and on and on. And that bothers me. And I believe all of these things have impact on economy. For economy to survive, you need peace and prosperity. You need democracy. You need freedom. You need love. You need truth. You need trust. And people just don't get it. That when you don't have these fundamental values, ultimately it's going to catch up. And there are no shortcuts. It is being seen today. It will catch up. And I'm sure Dr. Raghuram Rajan will talk more about economy. So to me, Gandhi is so very relevant to improve our economy, to get employment, to decentralize, to free systems. Just before we came here, Raghu and I had a conversation saying, what are the solutions? We don't want to talk about problems, we want to talk about solutions. And he had some great ideas. I'm sure he's going to talk about it. But I worked on railways reforms, and I know that if you push railways, you can add 1.5% to GDP. If you simplify your laws and reform your judiciary, you can add another 1.5% to your GDP. And we can go and give you a list of things to do. Do you have political will to do it? Are you willing to really free up the system? To free up that system, you need to free minds. To free minds, you need democracy. You need decentralization. All of these things are interconnected. So don't assume that you are going to build a nation based on one simple idea. Building a nation is very difficult, very complex than building a company. So I want all of us to realize that Gandhi is much bigger than a person, than an idea. I'm so shaken up in a sense because I saw a series of tweets a couple of days ago which says Gandhi was the son of India and father of India is Modi. What a shame. What a shame. And I tell you, I have not been able to get that out of my system. We got to have courage to fight these kinds of lies, propaganda. Social network was not designed to promote this kind of stuff. I hope we'll have courage to fight and bring Gandhi back to the mainstream. Thank you.
Dr. Rajan.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me this afternoon, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to all of you. I'm not an expert on Gandhi. I've read his books. I have been inspired by his life. I've read books about him. And I agree with Sam that the message of Gandhi goes far beyond what people take away. And it's a message which is still very vibrant, very important for today, especially in his emphasis that the answers come through dialogue, through respect and tolerance for one another, and that India is too diverse a nation to have one theme, one idea. The vision of Gandhi and Nehru was essentially a vibrant, varied India, and an India with many colors that were held together by mutual tolerance and respect. And I think that's important to remember. Sometimes people say, India's weakness is, for example, its democracy, its vibrant debate. Lee Kuan Yew, for example, thought that democracy held India back. Now, the reality is that even with our democracy, we've grown at 7%, give or take a little bit because of statistics, but 7% for the last 25 years. Now, that's an achievement, no matter what kind of country you are. But we've done it being democratic. We've also done it over the last few decades. There has been a constant process of decentralization, which Sam talked about. More powers going from the center to the states, and more from the states to the panchayats and the municipalities. Not enough, but we've done that over time. Every finance commission, for example, has pushed more funding down from the center to the states. And, next year, we probably will overtake the United States as being the second most important source of world growth, next to only China, because we also have grown into a big economy. Now, of course, we've done a lot on growth, but we've also, in the process, accumulated some bads. You only have to go to some of the hill stations in India, and you see visually in front of you, when you look at Shimla, the problems with haphazard development. Beautiful hillsides now covered with rickety houses that you wonder what will happen if there's a serious flood, if there's serious rainfall or an earthquake. So with development, we've got, overdevelopment sometimes. The floods in Srinagar, the floods in Chennai are evidence of poorly structured development. We've also got, to some extent, even though we are getting wealthier, we haven't dealt with the problems of poverty. For example, malnutrition, which is a crime on our children. We still have malnutrition today. And malnutrition condemns these children to a stunted existence where they won't have the full use of their faculties. And we still need to work on that because we have much higher levels of malnutrition than consistent with a country of our level of development. So we have our challenges, but we should also not forget we've come a long way. As a democracy, we also have huge potential to convey a message to the world that it's not necessary to develop in the traditional way, which is authoritarian development, and I'll come to that in a second, that there is an alternative in which people are free to express themselves, people are free to debate, people are free to talk, and you can still get growth, and you can still get development. This is the message we could send to the rest of the world. Now, what I want to do is shift a little to what is happening today and say why I worry a little bit about where we are going. On the economic front, India has certainly slowed considerably in the last few quarters. Now, there is some hope that this is just a cyclical development. The world is slowing, we're also slowing. But I fear it's more than that, that in India, investment has been slowing for a long time, and most recently, consumption has joined in. Some of it is because there was a spate of reforms in the Narasimha Rao government in the early 1990s, continued through coalition governments, continued through Atal Bihari Vajpayee's NDA 1. But then for a variety of reasons, reforms slowed down. And we haven't had serious, sustained reforms, especially focused on improving the use of land, labor, power, and logistics. Not saying we haven't made any progress there, but the serious reforms we need for sustained growth, we haven't really done much over the last, maybe 15 years, for a variety of reasons. Some because political constraints held it back, some because ideology held it back. Now this has created tremendous problems in job growth. We're seeing joblessness as a fact of life in many parts of India. And for a while, youth are willing to accept that. But at some point, people are going to rise up and say, what's in it for us? We've already seen the phenomenon of middle castes asking for reservations because their traditional occupations are no longer remunerative, land-based occupations, but they're also not finding jobs in the private sector. So they want reservations in government jobs. Now, to some extent, these are symptoms of the fact that we are not doing enough. We're not doing enough in growth. We're not doing enough to make it inclusive. We're not broad-basing that growth. Now, in this environment, we have a government which certainly has a particular way of governing. It is much more centralized than certainly the previous two governments, the UPA 1 and UPA 2, but even perhaps more centralized than NDA 1. And it's both centralizing in practical terms, in the sense that a lot of decisions are made in the Prime Minister's office and not outside by the ministers, but also it's trying to reverse the decentralization that was happening through Finance Commission grants, through the Constitution itself, and in a sense taking back power to the center. And the question you have to ask yourself is this the right approach for India? And certainly my argument would be that from what experience we've had on the economic side, it doesn't work that well. Politically, it might work in furthering the aims of the government, but economically it hasn't worked well so far, because to some extent decision making has become paralyzed despite the political power of this government. But I'll leave to the discussion the issues of majoritarianism that are also coming up under this government. Is majoritarianism, which is antithetical to everything that Gandhi stood for. Is that the way we should be going? My way or the highway to all our minorities? And my sense is we can have a debate about that in the discussion. But I think there is a final point I want to sort of lay the ground for, and then we can have a broader discussion, which I think will be fruitful. Is Lee Kuan Yew right? Is it that we in India would be better off with a more authoritarian structure? A structure that makes the trains run on time, a structure that spreads fear through the country, a structure that works through a very strong bureaucracy and strong investigative agencies, a structure that today one of our biggest problems is that we don't acquire land easily. We can't build out our infrastructure. Even the government's Mumbai to Ahmedabad high-speed rail project, its price project, is slowed down because of problems with land acquisition. At least that's what we read in the papers. So should we become authoritarian? Should we, like our neighbor to the north, be able to take land from the farmers when we need it, develop and get the benefits of growth? Is India better off becoming authoritarian? To some extent, this is an important question. We heard earlier everything should be debated. This is something worth debating because many Asian economies were more autocratic when they started growing, and partly catch-up growth, which is what they were into, is quite easy with centralized direction, especially if you start off without having a huge amount of government capacity. In that case, give orders and ensure those orders are obeyed, because working to build consensus requires a far stronger government capacity. People who can work with people, people who can build consensus amongst the population. That's very hard. You see that as a necessity in industrial countries today. When you build a highway here, you have to get the people whose territory this highway goes through, whose land this highway goes through, to approve. For that, you have to have meetings, you have to convince them it's in their interest, and that requires far more government capacity than just saying, I've notified this land is the government's, clear out by the end of next week, right? So authoritarianism works when you have to make quick decisions, you don't have much government capacity, and in a sense, you know which direction to go because you're catching up. You don't have to worry about what kinds of decisions you have made. Now, many of these Asian economies, once they reached middle income, once they became more prosperous, once they approached the productivity frontier, moved towards democracy. Why? Because as you're closer to the frontier, you need more innovation. You're not sure of the direction because you're no longer building just bridges and roads. You're inventing things. And the government doesn't know what to invent. You need people to be able to invent, and therefore decentralizing power, giving up power more broadly, democratization is important, as is a stronger market economy. Now, this seems to be something you see again and again across the world. There are no rich countries that are not democratic, except perhaps for the oil kingdoms. That almost every country which has become rich is democratic. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is, have we chosen the wrong path? We started off being democratic, and we don't need to become democratic because we're already there. But should we now think of becoming autocratic? Because then we'll build our roads and highways and et cetera, there'll be no corruption, we'll put all the corrupt in jail, we'll have a wonderful country, and then when the time comes, we can become democratic. I would argue that given where India is, it's a pipe dream to think that we can go back on our democracy. And to some extent, almost surely, if in fact we go towards a more authoritarian government, it's not going to be that disciplined East Asian authoritarianism. Instead, it's going to be more the Latin American populist authoritarianism. We're going to give freebies to everybody. We're going to make sure that they're nice and happy. And in the process, investment will falter, development will falter, eventually growth will falter, and that authoritarianism comes to a bad end. Now, that's a conjecture. That's a conjecture. But what is not a conjecture is that we are a country which is approaching middle income. We're not there yet. We still maybe, we're about $2,000 per capita. By about 4,000, we should be truly middle income. So we need to double. That's probably a decade at normal rates of growth. Now, once we get there, moving forward from there, our democracy will be a great strength, because we will have to debate, we will have to have ideas, we'll have to innovate, we'll have to challenge. But I would argue also that from here to there, even while we may not be able to build roads, even though we may not be able to build bridges as effectively as our neighbor to the north, we can certainly have more vibrant universities. We can certainly have a more vibrant cultural environment. And we can certainly start innovating earlier, given the resources and the GDP we have. So we can find alternative pathways to growth. So if we can't go back to that system, and we do need this system going forward, why not make the best use of it? And the best use of it is expanding everything we do well. Our debating, our arguments, our knowledge creation in the new universities. And for that, I would argue authoritarianism is the worst possible direction. We need to encourage the kinds of debates we've always had. We need to encourage institutions like JNU, which produced our latest Nobel Prize winner. We need to create an environment in India where, in fact, we can have an advantage in the service economy, which we already have some foothold over. So I would argue going back to the old style of development, the Asian model, is probably not something that we will do well, given where we are. But let us invent a new model for ourselves, a model of growth which relies on our strengths, relies on our democracy, and feeds it. And even if Lee Kuan Yew is right, which I don't believe so, that democracy is an impediment to growth, it is an impediment which we cherish and we want. And that once we reach middle income, in fact, it will become an accelerator to growth. So let's strengthen our democracy, and I think that is something that Gandhi would very much believe in. Perhaps time for a discussion.
Very thought-provoking, and of course I think we'll walk out of here today having come up with an alternative model for socio-political economic growth, or certainly starting to think about how all of us and can help intellectuals in our country to that road. I think, Dr. Gupta, if we start off with, I know you have some questions, if we start off with that and then we'll open the floor to questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pitroda and Dr. Rajan, for your reflections. Dr. Rajan, you recently said in an interview that the central bank governor's role has become more political in recent times. And we do indeed see politics driving economic policies in some cases in India, but also now US and China. We could think of trade wars as perhaps being motivated by politics. To what extent is this healthy, and what are the dangers of that? And is it utopian or even desirable to want economic policies to be completely devoid of political interference?
So economic policies can't be independent of the politics. That's why we call it political economy, right? It has to be attuned to what's happening politically. At the same time, there are reasons why politicians have entrusted the technocrats with a number of activities, primarily because the politicians, when called upon at a particular point in time, may take a way out which is politically attractive but economically problematic. Let me give you an example. Take just the issue of non-performing assets. Okay? Now, many of you are familiar with the term. It's a loan that a bank has made that turns bad. Now, everyone wants to ignore the fact it's gone bad and to recognize it. The borrower doesn't want it to be termed bad. The banker doesn't want it to be termed bad because the banker will be accused of having made a bad loan in the first place. And so the banker wants to make a new loan to evergreen the old loan, to give the borrower the money to pay back. What about the politician? Politician doesn't want it to be recognized because it's, the politician has to put more capital into the banks if it's state-owned banks. So nobody really wants to recognize this. The problem, of course, is these bad loans don't get good magically. That sort of miracle which turns them from good to bad doesn't happen. What happens is they grow bigger and bigger and worse and worse. So what is a 10 rupee loan which is bad becomes a 100 rupee loan which is bad. And now it becomes even more important to suppress it because, and when it finally comes out, when you can't suppress it any longer, it's a big hit to the budget, it's a big hit to the government, it's a big hit to the bank, and you get essentially paralysis. Better that it be recognized early. The only person who has an incentive to do that is a technocrat who really doesn't care about being elected, but who's entrusted with the job of ensuring that those bad loans are revealed. That's why it sometimes makes sense to separate the technocracy from the politics. The strong political government always wants to keep intervening. In the long run, this is bad when it intervenes in areas where it really should keep out. The difficulty for governments is trying to figure out what those areas are and how to respect the institutions that previous governments in their wisdom, have set up.
Thank you.
Are we ready for questions then? Can I see some hands, please? Gentleman in the front. Can we hand a mic, please, to the gentleman in the front? Yeah.
Good evening, Dr. Rajan. My question is to you. Indian banks have been monitored and governed by the RBI, including the cooperative banks. What are the steps which have been taken, the steps which have been failed to be taken to prevent the dispersal of loans given to companies with poor financials, which has led to the diversion of the bank's money and the fraudulence which has occurred due to the letter of credit which have been issued by the bank during your term of office, like 2013 to 16?
Well, I don't think you need to point to my term. This is a constant problem. It has happened over various terms. So it is a structural problem in India that in the cooperative sector, we have a whole set of banks which the ideal is a good one, that we want localized institutions that can lend locally and fulfill the needs of particular communities. The problem is many of them have fairly strong political affiliations, and some of the loans are not made on a commercial basis, but often on either political or non-commercial basis, as you talked about some letters of credit and so on. Now, over time, we have the regulator has tried to make these more responsible and brought more transparency to these institutions. It is still very much work in progress, as you can see with this phenomenon of cooperative banks collapsing has been a regular one over India's entire sort of history. So don't say 13 to 16. But it's a problem because tackling it requires enormous political will and requires the political parties to cooperate with the regulator. We closed down, for example, 6 cooperatives. We said these guys will not be allowed to even open up again because they've destroyed value. The state government came in, said we're going to put more capital into these guys, start them up again. I said you're not going to start them in the same board of directors. No way you're going to start them in the same board because these are the guys who collapsed it. The problem is these are political parties who own these cooperatives, and they want to make sure that it stays within their camp. They were finally funded against my but fortunately with new boards. But that was a small battle. We have thousands of cooperatives, and it is a problem that needs to be resolved because it deeply now. Some people may say, well, how big is the loss here relative to the loss, say, in the other sector or something else? The problem is we need to clean up the financial system across the board.
Sorry, the gentleman behind me.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your views, Pitroda sir and Rajan sir. My question is regarding the IBC insolvency bankruptcy law that came in 2016, late 2016. And it has not really gone the way we would have expected, maybe. Everyone's talking about it. But I wanted to hear your views on, is it the intervention from the government that is making it the way it is? Or there are some other things which we are not being looking at, which can actually lead to the success, or we thought would lead to the success which we've not seen yet? That's my question.
By the way, I think we should talk about Gandhi also.
But you are in demand.
Well,
so continue.
Just on that particular issue, one of the worries, first, I would say the IBC is an important reform, well crafted by the government, and even the interim steps to enhance its efficiency, for example, ensuring promoters can't bid at the last moment, I think were positive steps. Unfortunately, the history of past reforms on bankruptcy, whether it's the debt recovery tribunals or the the SARFAESI Act, has been that the promoters start figuring out how to slow down the process. And unfortunately, the judiciary doesn't short circuit that, but instead enhances the ability to keep appealing. So something which should take a few months then gets extended into years, and it becomes totally ineffective. Because at that point, once it takes years, the promoter goes to the banker and says, do you want to take me into this court and spend a few years there, or shall I give you 50 paise on the rupee and you settle for that? And I've seen some pretty horrendous attempts to settle like that. If we don't have a serious debt recovery process, right, then debt becomes a joke in India. It's essentially equity. It's equity with a cap, because the banker takes the downside, doesn't get any of the upside. And that's what my friend Arvind Subramaniam calls riskless capitalism. You can't have that. We were moving away from that. I think it is important that the judiciary introspect and ask why every one of these reforms is being thwarted. Isn't there a principle of natural justice by which the taxpayer, his or her money, is also important? It's not just the rights of the promoter. How do we make sure that a system works? The problem is, every time we then bring in a more draconian system, which essentially pummels the small and medium-sized guy, but the big guy figures out how to get around it. We can't keep doing that. So it is important that we have a limit on the appeals, we have a limit on the intervention, and that, hopefully these are teething problems. But it may well be we are now into the era of not 270-day resolution, but multiple year resolution, in which case it's a failure. And we need to rethink again. But I think it's important that we have introspection on all sides.
Dr. Rajan, I have a question on that note. So whether it's the judiciary, whether it's our ability to implement reforms in India, which you spoke of in your keynote as well, where are we stuck? So demonetization, many would argue, either way, there's strong critics, there's strong supporters, but I think I'll appreciate your views on demonetization. GST, we have spoken about the fact that it wasn't really best implemented. And actually, is there a problem with us implementing our ideas and our policies in India because of the sheer scale of the country? And therefore, coming to your point about authoritarianism, is that for a temporary period the time? You said, actually, no, we have to go back to democracy, we have to strengthen democracy. How in a country as complex as India do you implement reforms on such a massive scale? And we'd appreciate your views on that.
Chinese have a term, crossing the river by feeling the stones. That means you take one step at a time to cross a river. They have a big country, bigger than ours, right? And the question is, what are they doing right that we're not? And I think one of the things they do is experiment to see what the consequences will be, figure out what the consequences are, and then roll out more widely. We need to do that. What instead we do is theorize. I'm being very, very sort of a little too categorical. Obviously, we do experiment and all that. But some of these big projects, GST for example, we had an idea of how it would work, and then we implemented and found all the problems. Now, perhaps we should have started in some other way to just see what the teething would be, maybe run a parallel thing without any implications for revenues until we knew that system worked, then move people over to that. I mean, there are different ways. You could have run it in small pilots before rolling it out. I don't think authoritarian decision making is really good for India because without inputs, we can get, I believe demonetization did an enormous amount of economic damage. Whether it did some political good, I leave that to others. But economic damage, partly because it was conceptualized in one place, and partly because it was rolled out in fact, you couldn't experiment with demonetization because of the nature of the beast. But I think this we can do better. Now, it would help if we improve the quality of our bureaucracy. We have some very good people, but often capacity is missing, sometimes because we have too few bureaucrats. People think we have a lot of bureaucrats. We actually have a small number relative to our population. we have too few to roll out some of the projects that we have. But I don't think it's beyond our capacity. And I don't think the need is for more authoritarianism. I think the need is for more sensible planning.
And Mr. Pitroda, during your time when you were advisor to Prime Ministers of India, we had the telecom revolution in India, which really brought mobile connectivity, phone connectivity to every corner of India and transformed us, set us on that path of transformation. What was different during that time? What did you do? Was it what Dr. Rajan was articulating? Is it implementation, test runs? Tell us more about that.
First of all, we had political will. Indira Gandhi agreed that she is going to back this up. When I gave her a presentation in 1980 and told her that IT and telecom will change the face of India, she understood that phrase and she said, okay, let's do it. So political will from her, then that was passed on to Rajiv Gandhi, gave us the autonomy, flexibility, freedom that we needed. Two, we had domain expertise. We had a lot of talented people. We had a lot of young talent that we could mold. But then we had to shield ourselves from the government bureaucracy. So we set up a telecom commission, but bureaucracy wouldn't allow us to work. So I still remember the day I had to go to Rajiv and said, look, Rajiv, I got to take the job as a secretary, telecom. Bureaucracy said it cannot be done because you are already a minister. You cannot have two titles. You cannot be a minister and still be a secretary. I should scrap the minister, I want to be a secretary. So you needed someone with domain expertise to bite the bullet and stay there for a while. If they can fire you in 12 months, you are finished. So you got to have a first political will, then domain expertise, then a staying power in the system that is constantly attacking you, that wants to fight you, that don't want you to succeed because there are a lot of vested interests. Import lobby. I mean, we had cases when President of Siemens came to India and tried to convince Rajiv Gandhi that we should scrap what we were doing. And I had to pick up phone and call Rajiv and said, you are not going to do that. So you need that kind of combination. So when someone like him speaks on finance, Prime Minister or Minister has to listen. Okay, and say, look, this is not good, guys. I won't let you do it. It is that combination of domain expertise, political will, willingness to listen is what you need. Today, people think they have all the answers. They have no clue. I know in telecom, look, BSNL was the 7th largest telecom company in the world in 2010, not too long ago, or 2008. Okay. 7th largest telecom company in the world, today it is bankrupt. Why is it bankrupt? Mismanagement, government interference, bunch of guys who don't know what they are talking about. Okay. And you have allowed them to do that. So, I mean, I can go and give you a list of things like this. Railway modernization. We put together an entire plan on railway modernization. Minister of Railway worked with us, agreed, and he goes and makes an announcement, Dinesh Trivedi, that we are going to cut down a little bit of prices on ticket. What happened? Mamata Banerjee decided to fire him. Political interference. No political will for railway reforms. And everything got on backtrack. So there are lots of examples like that. It's unfortunate.
I have to just add that, when you were at CDOT,
Yeah.
One of the prized sort of jobs for people leaving IIT was to work in CDOT because
Absolutely.
you gave them the freedom to innovate.
Absolutely.
And they felt, a lot of my friends, really smart guys, gave
Good
up
guys.
scholarships.
Absolutely.
Went to work for them.
We had 500 engineers, mostly from IITs, IIM guys. And I remember Nandan Nilekani came and said, look, if Infosys doesn't work, will you hire me? Infosys had 5 people then, total staff. Wipro had 8 people. Jack Welch, as chairman of GE, was coming to India. Wanted to meet Rajiv Gandhi. Rajiv had no time, so Rajiv said, Sam, can you handle him? So I called Jairam Ramesh, who was my chief of staff. I said, Jairam, get a meeting set up with Jack Welch. So I had a meeting with Jack, Montek and I and Jairam and his staff. And I said to Jack, Jack, I want to sell you software. And Jack said, I'm not buying software, I want to sell you engine. And I said, I'm not buying engine. So he said, what do we do? I said, well, we have nothing to do. So Montek got very upset, saying Sam is locking horns with chairman of GE. After about 60 seconds, Jack said, okay, tell me what you want. So we gave him a presentation on software, and I said, Jack, I want $10 million order from you. He agreed. Send a team to visit Bangalore. I get a call from Nandan saying, we don't have an office. What do we do? I said, take them to Taj Mahal Hotel. Meet them in a lobby. Don't tell them you don't have office. When we got the order from GE, I picked up phone and called IBM, Motorola, TI. That's how we started software industry. Nobody knows. Nobody understands, a bunch of clowns. Okay? But that's what happens, guys. And they get all the publicity. Okay? Just 1 minute. This story was never told. Nobody told this story to anybody. One fine day, I see on the front page of Wall Street Journal, about 15 years ago, story between Sam Pitroda and Jack Welch. You have to have that freedom. See, then Prime Minister didn't interfere. He didn't say, what are you doing? Why did you call IBM? Why did you call Motorola? That ability to do things, democratization, decentralization, flexibility, innovation is so very important. You know what this government did? As soon as they came to power, the first thing they did is they scrapped National Innovation Council. I was the chairman. I went to the government. I went to PM's office. I talked to PM also. He's a friend personally. So I went to PM's office. I said, look, don't scrap Innovation Council. We'll find somebody else to do it. I don't have to be there. I'm too old. But continue. They said, no. We think Innovation Council won't work in our system. You'll pay for it, I'm telling you. It's a nation of 1.2 billion with lots of diversity, different ideas. You got to respect everybody. You got to love everybody. And I am very worried at my age. Believe me. All the stuff that we work for 50 years, I see being challenged, going down the drain because of some crazy idea. And they are being celebrated. And they are supposed to be heroes and great and wonderful. And, and I'm sitting there and watching and saying, what the hell is going on? Am I really stupid? Maybe I am. And I worry. Believe me, I worry a lot about India. I wish I could explain to you how much I worry.
Dr. Moria.
Karan, good to have you here.
Sam, my dear friend, we all know as the father of Indian telecoms. Now we know as the father of Indian software as well. So thank you very much. Before I ask my question, this is my first public opportunity. I've been fighting really hard to get the 2-year post-graduation work visa back. And we won and we got it back. And we have Sanam to thank for all her help as well.
Hey, Sanam, good.
Dr. Rajan, I'm not sure if you're aware that just a few hundred yards away from here, the LSC, a new building, was opened by the Queen 2 months after the financial crisis in 2008, November. And she asked the professors there, why didn't any of you spot the crash coming? And today I was in a speech in Birmingham, I said one person did spot the crash coming, and that was Dr. Rajan. Could you tell us, in your own words, how you predict this to come so that we can all learn and maybe try and predict the next crisis? And linked to that, Sam mentioned Brexit. What are your views on Brexit and where it's going?
This was going to come.
Well, actually, the person she asked the question of was Luis Garicano, who was a PhD student at Chicago when I was there, a very fine professor at LSE. So what made me worried then, and do I know anything about what's going to happen in the future? Well, first, what made me worried then was that I mean, cut a long story short, I saw banks showing a lot of profit and very little risk. And as a finance guy, you know, the only mantra which works in finance is there's no such thing as a free lunch. How are they making so much money while showing so little risk? And when you think about it, then you realize that what they're doing is effectively selling insurance. That's the way to make money without seemingly taking on risk. Think about an insurance company selling catastrophe insurance. Makes a lot of money. Steady profit every year until the catastrophe hits. That's when it pays out. This is what they were doing, taking deep out of the money insurance contracts, which they hoped would never be called. But if a crisis hit, they would suffer big losses, right? So that's sort of my thought, and then I went into what they were doing, and a lot of what they were doing was precisely that, writing guarantees against really bad events. And as the events started emerging, they got called. There are various ways you can do that. One is explicitly writing those guarantees against various AAA-rated securities. That's what AIG did. But you can also do it in other ways. For example, you offer lines of credit which are callable when bad stuff happens, and then you get a lot of exposure to the rotten stuff at that point. And you get a fat, nice premium in good times, which then you lose at bad times. Now, the problem is once you see something like this and you're lucky enough to be right, not that I wanted the financial crisis to happen, people think you can do it again. That's the danger. What am I worried about today? I don't, the excesses aren't in the same places. They always find new places to emerge in. And as a result, anybody would be silly to say we're confident it's not going to happen, because in a long period of sustained, easy financial conditions, the natural propensity of industry is to take risk, of the financial industry. And it comes in different ways. One could argue that, first there's been a leveraging up of the industrial sector, certainly in the US, but there's also become there's a lot of dependence on liquidity. And if that liquidity vanishes, some of the trading schemes that look very easy today will become very, very problematic. We haven't seen that because central banks have continued supplying liquidity. At some point when they stop, we will see what happens. But for the moment, I think we're safe because they're still pumping in a huge amount of liquidity. Brexit, I don't have a strong view. I mean, you've heard every which way on that particular question. I will say to the point of, to some extent, that cry, take back control, is not just about taking back control from Brussels to London. It's taking back control from London to the localities, Northern England, etc., which are, and this goes back to the point that Sam made about decentralization, that increasingly the world, which is buffeted by these various other forces, feels that it has very little ability to respond because so much is determined elsewhere, not locally. And so people are asking to take back some of the power so that they can do something about it. And we've got, and in a sense, this also reflects the anger against the elite, because the elite have taken away power, because they say, trust us, we know what to do. Well, I think some decentralization may not be a bad thing, even if people make mistakes. At least it's their mistakes, and they learn from it, and they feel empowered about doing something about it.
Can I just add something to what he said? Can I take 1 minute?
Yes, sure.
You know what Raghu is saying in a different way is that the existing model is geared more towards exploitation. And the new models are designed for empowerment. And telecom is a great example. I go back to telecom because I understand that a little bit. Today, in telecom, we could reduce costs substantially only because of decentralization. When I started my telecom journey in 1965, we used to design huge, big telephone switching systems, 100,000 lines, number 5 ESS and all that. Now we design smallest little antenna and micro cells. Each cell is a community by itself. You empower that community, you are done. But nobody wants to do that. They are afraid that if I empower that community, I lose control. Then I can't exploit. I don't think we will have option. The way technology is moving, big data, analytics, robotics, machine learning, all that is moving towards empowering people. I am empowered with what I have. I can decide on my own destiny. You can't tell me what to do anymore. That phase is over. You may go through 10 years of back and forth, but you are on a wrong track. Genie is out of the bottle. Just accept it, expedite it, and empower everybody, irrespective of their race, religion, caste, color, education, rich, poor. Everybody is going to be empowered, and you have no options.
Sam, just to push you on that, I mean, it does give you the other option, right, of centralized control, surveillance technology, all that stuff also.
Yeah.
So, I think this
True,
is what you
but
meant
that's
by
not
push.
going to last too long. Okay? I mean, what would you do by watching 1.3 billion people in China? So fine, you watch them. So what do? You know, you got all this data, you know everything about me, what do I do, shopping, this and that. But so what? I mean, they think I'm going to buy a shoe, but I'm not going to buy a shoe. Yeah, so I think it's a little bit of too much. Okay? So in China, they are trying to sort of control so much data on people. Fine, you will get 20, 30 guys who are crooks, monitor them. But assume that on an average, everybody is good. Assume that there is no need to monitor you and me, as an example. Okay?
Presuming we're good.
I know that much. Okay? I know that much. But the point is, I think these guys are going too far on AI and robotics and all, machine learning. Okay? So, fine, you know, I have nothing to hide. You monitor it, fine, monitor it. Information technology brings about openness, accessibility, connectivity, networking, democratization, decentralization. Nothing you can do.
Girl in the middle, please.
So we have time for one quick question.
My question is to Dr. Rajan. You asked us today if we would be better off with a more authoritarian structure, right? I mean, having served as a central banker and having enjoyed so much popularity amongst the youth, you are definitely one of the most favorite central bankers in India. I want to know from you if inflation targeting is the right regime to follow for an economy like India, which is mainly consumption driven. I personally feel consumption is sort of impervious to monetary policy. And secondly, also, I mean, central bankers around the world are sort of torn between chasing targets and stimulating growth. You know, there are central banks that are slipping into the whole negative interest rate territory, and for some reason, inflation is not picking up. We've been talking about innovation. Is inflation targeting regime an idea that we're tied to, or is it like we need to innovate on the whole monetary policy front as well now?
It's a good question. The way you started, I thought you were going to ask something else. Look, inflation targeting was and is a technique for a particular time, a time of high inflation when you want to bring down inflation. And there's nothing magical about it. All you're saying is, I'm going to set a commitment for the central bank that it will try and achieve this target. And in India we used to do it. People sort of think inflation targeting is a new thing. No, the RBI used to say 5%, but nothing was formal about it, nothing was structured about it, and it wasn't even 5% was WPI or CPI. We weren't quite sure. What we did was formalize that process, and it had exactly what we intended it to have, which is bring down inflation. Now, was the central bank the only factor? No, obviously not. Other factors, the government did a lot on the food side to bring down food inflation. There was, oil prices came down. There are a lot of other factors, but the fact that India has had low inflation now for a sustained period of time is in no small part to that particular innovation. Now, inflation targeting proves less good at the other problem, which is to push up inflation. We know how to bring down inflation, but it's much harder to push up inflation. And that's the problem the industrial countries have been grappling with. Now, does that mean you change targets? I am very skeptical that changing the target to something like average targeting or price level targeting, something like that is going to make a magical difference to the level of inflation. I really think instead we've sort of got a problem of success now. Expectations about inflation are really low in industrial countries, so inflation is really low. I would say take advantage of it to the extent you can, have easier monetary policy, have lower interest rates, but the problem is this is coming at the same time as there are other reasons for growth slowing, such as demographics, aging populations, this, that. So my main point is targeting is not the problem. Monetary policy doesn't have much in the way of tools at this point. Focus on other stuff if you want to enhance growth. Don't put the burden back on monetary policy. And targeting, to my mind, is peripheral to the issue.
So, just the very final question, Dr. Rajan. Where does India go from here? We have a slowdown in India that is well known. We also have the backdrop of a global slowdown. But we have an unemployment crisis in the country that is worsening. What do you, as not just the most popular central banker in India, but also all over the world, do you have any recommendations that we would hope the Indian government takes on board?
And let me add to that. So unemployment is worsening, while in a voter survey, we found out that jobs are one of the most critical issues in deciding the vote. Sorry.
Well, I mean, you would hope that our strength as a democracy starts showing up. If policies aren't working, essentially people start saying, look, we want something different in terms of policy, and that feedback starts energizing the government to change its path. One of the problems, and I've said this very strongly, suppressing criticism means you don't hear the feedback. If you don't hear the feedback, you can't course correct at an appropriate point in time. So calling all the critics and saying, please don't criticize the government, I think is bad for the government itself. It may feel good for everybody to praise you and to say that you're the second coming of Christ, but that's not going to generate the kind of awareness you need within government itself. And I say that fully having been at the brunt of criticism when I was in office also, that it's useful. There was some times when they said, you guys don't understand anything about liquidity. The private sector kept telling us. And then you listen to them and you found that, yes, maybe they're right. And maybe we need to make a course correction. So I would hope that the government listens and sees what it needs to do. And there are plenty of economists and plenty of wise people in India who can give advice. But it's important that the government take that advice and, again, deliberate and maybe act on it.
I'll add two things to this. One is institution capture, which generates fear. Courts, ED, election commissioner. Everywhere you look around, you find that I lost my confidence as a citizen. Two, media is so mobilized that only one voice is heard. I will not get the kind of coverage I used to get in free media. Fact, because I know all of these people, they are my friends. I have grown up with them for 30 years. I can pick up phone and call India Today or CNBC or whatever. They would say, no, Sam. If we do something, there'll be a guy from ED at my front door. They say it openly. So along with decentralization, democratization, you also need to get the fear out. You need to be transparent. You need to let media know that it is good to promote other ideas, not just listen in your conference room. Open up the system.
Mr. Pitroda, thank you very much. On that note, we're going to have to close. So thank you very much, Dr. Rajan and Mr. Pitroda, for discussing ideas that were both heavy with meaning but also light with candor. Thank you very much, Sanam and NISAU and all the King's team for doing all the hard work behind the scenes. Thank you all for being here today and making this very lively. May we all contemplate and discuss more and tweet less. With this, I would like to call the event to a close.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will, sorry.
I'm sorry, but teaching starts here in 5 minutes. I'm very sorry.
Sorry.
No.
For the journalists to think about it.
So you can just make a quick comment.
Just tell us, we
will
can
leave
meet,
it at
we can
that.
meet separately.
Yes.
We can meet separately.
I want the young kids to understand.
Oh, you want that too? Okay. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry for this.
It's up to her. I'm not handling.
I'm basically talking about 70% of India's population is very poor, divided in caste, diversity, and they will not understand what we're talking about. And that's why they're voting for somebody who don't understand. My objective is science and religion is where this country has taken strong measures to develop NHS, motorways, and all these stuff. And these systems are to be made in India. It cannot be done if people have mixed their life with religion. I'm not talking about religion should be given respective space. However, logic and rationality derived by science has been the fulcrum of this country for the last 200-300 years. And that's why they are where they are now.
Thank you for your comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Remain seated for a few minutes at the guys at the back.
Good to see you. Thanks for coming here.
A few minutes while we get the speakers out.